Well, hello there, Internet. My name is Richard, and this is Nim, and today we're talking about PTSD. Can you have PTSD when you have a kitten? So not to make light of the very real problem of PTSD, I do have some kittens to rehome here. Although these little guys are still on the bottle, so if you happen to be in the LA area, I really need to rehome these little guys. So if you could, yeah, give me a hand here. Because my neighbors hate cats, and if I let these guys out of the house right now, they'd probably have about an hour to live. So, post-traumatic stress disorder is exactly what it sounds like. Post-after traumatic, some kind of a trauma, usually emotional, but sometimes physical, or certainly both, and stress, exactly what it sounds like. Everybody knows what stress is. And then finally, disorder, meaning that it is somehow hampering your life, causing you a large amount of trouble. See, almost everybody suffers from post-traumatic stress. You've had a bad experience, been written up at work, gotten a traffic ticket, had your friend shoot your cat, or your neighbor, because they certainly wouldn't be your friend at that point, shoot your cat, which has happened to me at least twice, and at least 5 times, and obviously you're bothered. One example of post-traumatic stress would be there was a fellow who watched The Exorcist, and the night after watching it, he couldn't go home. He was totally flipped out and had to sleep in a friend's house on the carpet because he couldn't be alone. This would be post-traumatic stress. It's not a disorder because it didn't last more than a month, and honestly, didn't, really mess up the rest of his life. So there's the thing. So the first thing you should understand about post-traumatic stress disorder is before you go diagnosing yourself with some kind of a problem, first examine the possibility that you're surrounded by dork holes. If you are surrounded by dork holes, you will be depressed. If you have the kind of neighbors that, hate cats because they're dork holes and try to extinguish their lives, you're going to be under stress. And if you have 6 kittens that you need to, 5 now, kittens that you need to find a home for, you're going to be under some kind of distress. It does not mean you have post-traumatic stress disorder or that you're depressed or, any of that. It just means you're going through a rough time. And by the way, if you have depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, if you're not going to a doctor, unless you can't get to a doctor, you need to stop whining. I knew a guy said he had an addiction to video games so bad that he wouldn't sleep with his wife. I mean, literally, wouldn't even sleep in the same bed with her because he was too busy playing World of Warcraft. He said he had a problem. Yes, his problem was he was a jerk. If he had a real problem, he'd go see a counselor. Just saying. Now here is my second special guest for this particular video. This is Nimbus. Nimbus and her sister Nim. So Nimbus here is going to help me talk about the brain structures involved in PTSD. Now there are 3 main structures that we have identified to be involved. The prefrontal cortex, which is where reasoning and thinking happen. It is the most you part of yourself. The hippocampus, which I believe is somewhere around here, and the amygdala. I believe you have 2 of them in there somewhere below the eyes, back in this region. Now, the amygdala and the hippocampus inhibit one another. They fight for control much like Freud's id and ego do. The amygdala, so named because it has an almond shape. Yes, I know, you want to talk. Come on, let me finish. The amygdala, so named because of its almond shape, is responsible for emotional response. In someone who has suffered PTSD, often the amygdala is swollen. It is much larger than it should be because they have very strong emotional responses. They have evolved to survive an environment where bad things tend to happen, and they must react quickly. PTSD is in some ways an evolution of the brain to survive war. That's why so many veterans suffer from it. Now the hippocampus is involved in long-term memory. I always remember it by imagining a hippo camping. You're always going to remember a hippo camping for a long time. It's really hard to forget a hippo camping. Nimbus, that is not a good place for you. So, what does this mean? It means that because the hippocampus is shrunken or smaller in people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, because the hippocampus is shrunken or smaller in people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, they often have difficulties with memory. In fact, one theory on post-traumatic stress disorder is that it is a subconscious inability to place a certain event in time, therefore the event is still happening inside the mind. That is new to me. I've recently done research on that. But it does make sense because one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder is flashbacks or the feeling that you were still suffering from that event. Another symptom is nightmares, which of course, nightmares, dreams in general, tend to be related to what's happening in your life. Like tonight, or today, because I sleep during the day, I will likely dream about a kitten crawling on my shoulder and trying to find a home for a lovely, lovely kitten. So I remind you, if you live in the Los Angeles area, you can adopt Nimbus here. She should be ready for adoption in about 4 weeks. I'll get her off the bottle, and then she'll be good. Now, as I was saying, the final structure involved is the prefrontal cortex. And interestingly enough, people who have suffered injury to the prefrontal cortex in some studies are less likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Why this is, we don't know. But the prefrontal cortex often does involve being able to control yourself. Now, once again, although I'm not finished with this video, I'm going to ask you to like, perhaps subscribe, maybe share this on your social media, because you don't want this lovely, lovely kitten going to the pound, and I need to find her a home. So if you could, I would really appreciate it if you did something to save little Nimbus here. Alrighty? Now, my lovely assistant Stripe here, the third kitten I have to find a home for, is going to help me talk to you about about the Pacific Ocean for no good reason. No, about a specific case of PTSD, or rather a specific situation wherein PTSD affected a group of Vietnam veterans. Now, there was a veteran I had the luck to interview, and he was, of course, from Vietnam, and he talked about the fact that he was trained in welding after the war as a matter of vocational therapy. And these welding machines often made a popping sound. Well, what would happen is that his class, which was composed almost exclusively of veterans, one or two of them would hear this popping sound and remember the sound of gunshots. They would then be paralyzed, often crawling under their desks for help or for protection, and being unable to come out until the psychiatric emergency team arrived. I believe he said it started of a class of nearly 30 and ended with a class of less than 10. Most of these veterans were unable to cope with their experiences of war. And this supports the theory that PTSD causes some form of psychological inability to escape the war and to realize that is no longer part of your life. And Stripe here, look, there's your stripe. There's your stripe. Yes, yes. There's your stripe. Stripe here, as I say, is having trouble remembering that she needs a home. So once again, I really need help finding a home for these animals. Now, here to help me talk about coping strategies for PTSD is, of course, the much beloved and very famed actor who played Gilligan, Bob Denver. Yeah, my brother named him. So Bob here is going to help me talk to you about coping with PTSD, or at least what little of it I know. Now again, I have never been diagnosed with PTSD. I'm going to make that clear. And there's a kitty butt. Yes, we've all seen the kitty butt. Yes, it's very cute. It's a kitty butt. We all love kitty butt. Come on, Bob, face the camera. You're supposed to be a professional. So, yes. One thing that was mentioned in Tricia Hirschberger's video, if I have failed to mention this, Tricia Hirschberger did a video where she interviewed a veteran who suffers from PTSD. And I do believe they talked about reaching out. The big problem with this often is most or many people who suffer from PTSD have a failed support network to begin with. This is because many people run from a bad home life to join the military because the military is a method of getting out. Now, as I say, I've never been diagnosed with PTSD, but I did have a bad home life. I never did join the military, but I'm certainly suffering from some mental illnesses. So if you can reach out to your friends and loved ones, that's cool. I mean, I can't because my friends and loved ones just wound up making my life miserable. But, yeah, so there is that. Now, again, one methodology, and it goes along with, you know, reaching out to your friends and loved ones, is you can build new memories, strengthening the hippocampus, and therefore inhibiting the amygdala, which is causing your emotional responses, causing the flashbacks, causing the bad memories. You can build these new memories by forms of play therapy, like you can do puzzles, draw maps, jigsaw puzzles, I mean. Anything that is visual spatial is going to help you. Many people talk about video games. Yes, there are video games, but then some people who suffer from PTSD can't handle them because most video games involve a kind of conflict. So that's one of those things. I mean, my big problem is if I see a movie that I'm too into, I will actually get upset, and I'll actually remember things that have traumatized me in the past and become angry. So play therapy for me is not going to work. I have to deal in a direct therapy which involves addressing the memory itself. And there are a number of ways I do that. One is I write letters to a friend of mine. The act of writing the letters forces me to be calm while taking on these memories. It cements them in my mind and removes from them the heavy emotional response. This is very important. And it does help. Another thing, you know, you've seen them on this program before. I've shown you that I draw comics about my horrible life, and that helps. Now, there is a form of therapy, new memory therapy, and I've read about it, where you would take some form of unique stimulus. For some people, it's like those massager things. They grab the massager things, and they hold one in each hand, or they put one under each thigh, and then they recall the memory. The case I read, there was a woman who had suffered sexual assault by a family member. And she remembered calling out for help and no one being there. So then she imagined or fantasized about calling. So she fantasized about calling out for help and someone actually helping her, which is not what happened in the real memory. This, because of its unique response, caused a strong new memory that was able to reduce the anxiety. Now, you can treat this medically, and you should treat this medically with anti-anxiety medication, which certainly will help. I mean, that's what it will do. But if you do not engage in therapy, you will never get over PTSD. You will never get over depression. You have to engage in some form of therapy. That's just what it is. This is Nim, and this is Nimbus. If you know someone with PTSD, you should try to be a good friend to them. But you will have to understand that being a good friend doesn't always just involve talking. It may involve going to their blog, liking their videos, and, helping them find a job or something like that. Lord knows I need a better job, and I think if I had one, most of my stress disorders would go away. But that's me. I'm Richard Neal, and if you know anyone who would like some lovely kittens who lives in the Los Angeles area, please let me know. Peace and long life. Live long and prosper. And kitties for all.